No one warns you that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the person who kisses you goodnight for nearly 4 decades. My husband had a ritual every Tuesday, exactly 2 p.m., not 1:55, not 2:05. For 38 years, he left the house with the same leather briefcase and the same calm smile. If I asked where he was going, he'd brush my cheek and say, "Just keeping us safe." I never questioned it. Why would I? He was an accountant. Numbers were his comfort, his shield, his identity. Bills were paid early, taxes filed ahead of schedule. Retirement? Handled, he'd say, like it was already locked away and labeled. Then, one ordinary afternoon, my phone rang while I was standing in the produce aisle, squeezing avocados like the future still made sense. "Mom," my son said. His voice was wrong, too careful, too empty. "Dad collapsed at work. You need to come now." By the time I arrived, it was over. A massive heart attack, the doctor said. Quick, merciful. I nodded like I understood, like the words had weight. They didn't, not yet. At the funeral, I didn't cry. People whispered that I was strong, that shock does strange things. They brought casseroles and spoke softly as if grief were something that might wake up if startled. But the truth was stranger. I felt relief. Not because I didn't love him, I did, but beneath the exhaustion and the polite condolences, something inside me loosened, like I could finally take a full breath. I didn't know why, I just knew it was real. 3 days later, the letter arrived. Plain envelope, typed name, no return address. It was from the bank. They expressed condolences. Then they informed me, politely, clinically, that I was listed as the secondary holder on my husband's safe deposit box, a box I had never heard of, a box that had been paid in full through the end of the year. Safe deposit box. I read the letter 3 times, waiting for recognition to kick in. It never did. That afternoon, I called the bank. The woman on the phone confirmed everything. Yes, the box existed. Yes, my name was on it. Yes, I could access it. Thursday, 10 in the morning. For the next 2 days, I drifted through our house like a guest, opening drawers, touching folders, looking at labels written in my husband's neat, confident handwriting. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect, like a carefully staged room meant to look lived in, but empty once you looked closely. On Wednesday night, my son came over. His face was tight, pale. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "I've been reviewing Dad's financial records." I sat down slowly. "Some things don't make sense." And in that moment, before the bank, before the box, before the truth, I felt it. That quiet sense of relief finally made sense, because somewhere deep down, I think I already knew. On Thursday morning, I would open a metal box that held the real story of my marriage, and nothing in my life would ever look the same again. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe. This story unfolds layer by layer, and what's coming next changes everything. Thursday morning arrived wearing a gray sky and a chill that felt personal. I dressed like I was going into battle. Navy blazer, pressed slacks, low heels. Not morning clothes, armor. My son offered to come with me, but I refused. Whatever waited inside that box, I needed to face it alone. The bank was sleek and impersonal, all glass and steel. The kind of place designed to feel safe, even when it isn't. A manager met me at the door, offering condolences with a smile practiced just enough to sound sincere. "Your husband was a valued client," she said. That sentence landed wrong, too polished, too final. She led me past rows of offices into the vault. The hallway felt longer than it should have been, the air colder. The boxes lined the walls like metal teeth, each one holding someone's secrets. She stopped at number 847. When she handed me the key, I noticed something strange. She didn't look surprised, not curious, not hesitant, just prepared, like she'd opened boxes like this before, like she already knew what I was about to learn. "I'll give you privacy," she said, pointing me toward a small room with a table and chair. The box was heavier than I expected. That should have been my first warning. I sat down and stared at it for a long moment. 38 years of marriage reduced to a steel rectangle. Every Tuesday afternoon, every "don't worry about it," every time I trusted instead of checked. I opened it. Folders. So many folders. Thick, overstuffed. The first one was labeled Investments Actual. That word, actual, sent a chill through me. Inside were statements, charts, summaries, loss after loss, risky ventures, collapsed startups, speculative deals that had gone catastrophically wrong, hundreds of thousands of dollars gone. None of the accounts were joint. Every single one was in his name only. My hands started to shake. The second folder made my chest tighten. Home equity loans, multiple, taken out against our home. Our home. The walls where our children's height was marked in pencil. The kitchen I'd painted 3 times because I could never decide. Total debt, staggering. I pressed my palm flat against the table, trying to steady myself. Then I opened the third folder. Credit cards, in my name. 15 of them. Different banks, different limits, all maxed out. My Social Security number, my signature. Forged. My husband hadn't just lied to me, he had stolen my identity. I couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, like the walls were slowly leaning inward. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't desperation in one bad year. This was a system. At the bottom of the box sat a single envelope, cream-colored, thick. My name written in handwriting I'd loved once. I didn't want to open it, but I did, because at that point there was nothing left to protect. Inside that letter was the one confession I never expected, and the truth about what my husband had been doing every Tuesday at 2 p.m. I knew before I unfolded the letter that whatever was written inside would change how I remembered my marriage. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind of stationery you choose when you expect your words to last. My name was written carefully across the front, each letter shaped with the same precision he brought to everything else. I sat there for a long moment, listening to my own breathing, then opened it. "Maggie," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found the box." Not if you found it, when. That choice of word made my stomach drop. He wrote about an investment he made 5 years earlier, one he was certain would set us up for life. When it failed, he didn't tell me. He doubled down, took bigger risks, chased losses with desperation disguised as confidence. "Every Tuesday," he wrote, "I went to the bank trying to fix it." That was the truth behind the ritual, not discipline, panic. He admitted to the loans, the credit cards, the accounts in my name. He said he did it to buy time, that he was sure he could fix everything before I ever noticed, that I deserved peace, not worry. By the time he realized he couldn't undo it, the debt was already suffocating us. "We're probably bankrupt," he wrote. "The house may be lost. Your credit is ruined." I didn't cry. I felt something colder than grief settle in my chest. He ended the letter with an apology, then 3 words that felt almost cruel in their familiarity. I love you. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. My hands were steady now. Shock had burned off, leaving clarity in its place. When I walked out of the room, the bank manager looked up immediately. "Are you all right?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I will be." I asked for copies of everything in the box, every document, every statement. Then I asked for the name of a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud. Her expression shifted, not surprise, but recognition. When I got home, my son was already there, pacing. "Mom," he said, "I found something else." I didn't even let him finish. "There's no life insurance," I said. He froze. "How did you—" "Because your father didn't miss a detail." I laid the documents across the table, the debt, the forgeries, the concession letter. My son's face drained of color as he read. "This is criminal," he whispered. "Yes," I said calmly, "and we're going to treat it that way." For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. I thought the worst part was over once I knew the truth. I was wrong. The next blow didn't come from banks or lawyers. It came from my own family. That evening, my daughter called. Her voice was tight, controlled in a way that made my chest ache. "Mom," she said, "David told me what you think you found." Think. That single word told me everything. I explained carefully the safe deposit box, the forged signatures, the letter. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't soften it either. I told her exactly what was there because facts felt safer than emotions. There was silence on the line. Then she said it. Dad wouldn't do that. Not couldn't, wouldn't. She said he loved us, that he was careful, responsible, that grief must be confusing me, that maybe I was misunderstanding the paperwork. Every sentence felt like a quiet accusation. "You're talking about him like he was a criminal," she said. "He's not here to defend himself." I closed my eyes. "I'm not accusing him," I said. "I'm repeating what he admitted in writing." She didn't respond. Instead, she said something that cut deeper than any document ever could. "You're destroying his memory." The call ended shortly after. I sat in the dark long after, realizing something terrifying. The truth doesn't just expose lies, it forces people to choose sides, and not everyone chooses facts. Over the next few days, the lines hardened. My daughter stopped answering calls. Mutual friends grew distant, uncomfortable with the mess. They wanted a simple story, a good man, a tragic death. What I had was complicated, ugly, inconvenient. Meanwhile, the lawyer confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't just financial mismanagement. It was identity theft, fraud, crimes committed using my name. "And because you're married," she said, "some institutions will argue you benefited even if you didn't know." That word again, benefited, as if ignorance was profit. Court was coming, depositions, experts, months of fighting just to prove I hadn't agreed to the destruction of my own life. My son stood beside me through it all. He organized documents, made calls, sat with me at the kitchen table until midnight. One night, he confessed something that made my heart stop. "A few years ago," he said quietly, "Dad asked me to invest with him." My throat went dry. He wanted my son's savings, money set aside for his children, another lifeline thrown into deep water. "I almost did it," my son admitted, "but my wife said no." If she hadn't? I didn't let myself finish that thought. That's when I understood the full scope of it. This wasn't a single bad choice. It was a pattern, a spiral, a man drowning and pulling at anyone close enough to save himself. And still, my daughter refused to see it. Some people need the lie to survive. The truth threatens everything they believe. Before this story goes any further, make sure you subscribe. What happens in this part changes not just the case, but our family forever. The court date was still weeks away when my phone rang late one evening. It was my daughter. I almost didn't answer. Our last conversation had ended with silence so heavy it felt permanent. But something in me knew. If she was calling now, something had shifted. "Mom," she said. Her voice was shaking, not angry, not defensive, broken. "I went to the bank today." I sat down slowly. "I asked them to show me Dad's records," she continued. "I wanted to prove you were wrong." There it was, the confession hidden inside the sentence. She told me how the teller disappeared into a back office, how the wait felt too long, how a manager eventually came out with a folder and a look that made her stomach drop. "There was a credit card," she said, "in my name." My chest tightened. "I never opened it. I never signed anything, but it's there. $23,000, maxed out." Her credit ruined, her name used, her trust violated. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "How could he do this to me?" I didn't answer right away, because there was no answer that could make it make sense. Even now, even after everything I knew, hearing that he had crossed that line, had pulled our daughter into the wreckage, felt like a fresh wound. "I'm so sorry," I said finally, and this time she believed me. She came over that night, sat at the same kitchen table where my son and I had sorted through lies disguised as spreadsheets. I made tea we barely touched. We talked for hours. About her father, the good parts, the broken parts, the impossibility of reconciling both. "He taught me how to ride a bike. He walked me down the aisle. How can that man also be this man?" "Because people aren't just one thing," I said softly, "and love doesn't cancel out harm." That was the night the wall between us cracked. The next day, my lawyer helped her file fraud reports, just like mine. Same process, same disbelief from creditors, same slow grind toward proof. And then finally, court. The bank's lawyer argued that I benefited from the marriage, that shared life meant shared responsibility, that ignorance wasn't an excuse. My lawyer dismantled that argument piece by piece, forged signatures, separate accounts, expert testimony, the letter, his own written confession. When the judge ruled in my favor, I felt something release inside me. The house was saved, the liens removed, my name cleared. But victory felt quiet, because winning didn't restore the marriage I thought I had. It didn't erase the years of trust misplaced, and it didn't undo the damage done to my children. Still, as we walked out of the courthouse together, my son on one side, my daughter on the other, I knew this much. The truth had cost us dearly, but silence would have cost us everything. I thought surviving the truth was the hardest part until I realized what it was turning me into and how many others needed to hear it. After the court ruling, everyone expected me to relax. Friends said things like, "At least it's over now," and "You can finally move on." They didn't understand something important. The fight had ended, but my life hadn't restarted yet. I was 64 years old with a saved house, a cleared name, and almost nothing else. No retirement cushion, no safety net, no partner to lean on. Just a quiet home filled with echoes of a life I thought was secure. So I did something I never imagined I'd have to do again. I started looking for work. At my age, resumes feel like confessions. Every gap looks suspicious. Every year not working feels like an apology you're expected to make. I applied to bookstores, libraries, cafes, anywhere that might see value in experience instead of speed. Most places never replied. One small independent bookstore downtown called me in. The owner, Ruth, was older than me, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She studied my resume, then looked up. "You've been married nearly 4 decades," she said, "and now you want a job? Why?" I could have lied, said I was bored, said I wanted to stay active, but I was tired of protecting lies, mine or anyone else's. "My husband died," I said. "I found out afterward that he destroyed our finances using my name. I'm trying to rebuild from zero." Ruth didn't flinch. She closed the folder and smiled. "When can you start?" That job changed more than my bank balance. Working 3 days a week gave my life structure again. I recommended books, organized shelves, talked to strangers who didn't know my story and didn't need to. Ruth and I drank bad coffee during slow afternoons and talked about life. One day, she told me about her own marriage, about leaving a man who lied, not about money, but about everything else. "Everyone told me I was overreacting," she said, "that marriage means enduring." She looked at me carefully. Enduring what exactly? That question stayed with me, because I had endured silence, control disguised as care, a life where I was protected by not knowing. And now, strangely, I felt freer with less than I ever had with more. Then something unexpected happened. A woman came into the bookstore, hovering near the self-help section. She looked nervous, lost. "Can I help you?" I asked. She hesitated. "Do you have anything about financial abuse in marriage?" The word abuse hung between us. I walked her to the shelf, pulled out a few books. Then, without planning to do it, I said, "I've been through something like that, if you want to talk." We talked for an hour. When she left, she hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for believing me." That was the moment everything shifted. What began as a job to survive quietly turned into something far bigger, and soon women I'd never met started finding me for reasons I never expected. I didn't plan to become someone people talk to. I was just a woman shelving books, working quiet shifts, learning how to live on a modest paycheck. But after that first conversation, something changed. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough to be noticed. Another woman came in a week later. Different face, same hesitance. She asked about budgeting books, then hesitated, then said, "My husband says I'm bad with money." I felt my chest tighten. We talked, carefully, gently. No accusations, no advice she wasn't ready for. When she left, she thanked me for listening. Not fixing, not judging, just listening. Then another woman, and another. None of them used the word abuse at first. They said things like, "He handles everything," or "I don't really have access to the accounts," or "He gets upset when I ask questions." The pattern was unmistakable. Control disguised as care, secrecy disguised as protection, love used as a leash. One afternoon, Ruth watched me from behind the counter as yet another conversation stretched past closing time. "You're doing something," she said later, "whether you mean to or not." I shrugged. "I'm just telling the truth." "That's usually how it starts," she replied. We decided to try something small, informal, a monthly gathering after hours in the back of the bookstore. No advertising. No labels, just coffee, chairs, and space. The first night, 6 women showed up. 6 stories that sounded nothing alike on the surface and exactly the same underneath. One woman hadn't filed taxes in 10 years because her husband took care of it. Another had signed paper she wasn't allowed to read. One cried because she'd been called paranoid so many times she no longer trusted her own instincts. When it was my turn, I told them everything. The Tuesday bank trips, the safe deposit box, the forged signatures, the letter, the court fight, the daughter who didn't believe me until she had to. I didn't speak like a hero. I spoke like someone who had been terrified and angry and confused and still standing. "How did you stay strong?" one woman asked. I shook my head. I didn't. I just kept going anyway. The group grew. 10 women, then 15. We shared resources, lawyer names, credit repair tips, scripts for hard conversations. More than that, we shared belief. Belief that we weren't stupid. Belief that questioning wasn't betrayal. Belief that love didn't require blindness. One night after everyone left, Ruth poured wine into paper cups and raised hers toward me. "You know what he tried to do, right? Your husband tried to erase you." I thought about that. "He failed," she continued, "and now you're making sure he doesn't succeed with anyone else." I didn't feel powerful. I felt tired, but I also felt useful, purposeful, like the pain had been redirected instead of wasted. For the first time since his death, my story wasn't just about loss. It was about impact. 1 year after my husband's death, I would stand in that same bookstore and realize I was no longer rebuilding my old life. I was creating something entirely new. A year passed quietly. Not the kind of quiet filled with peace, but the kind that comes after a storm, when everything looks familiar and nothing is the same. The support group had grown to more than 20 women. Some stayed for months, some came once and never returned, carrying what they needed with them. I stopped counting victories by money recovered or debts erased. I counted them by moments. A woman opening her own bank account for the first time at 49. Another finally looking at her credit report without shaking. Someone leaving a meeting standing a little straighter than when she arrived. One evening during our anniversary gathering, I stood in front of the group and realized something unexpected. I wasn't trying to get my old life back anymore. For months, that had been my quiet obsession, restoring what was lost, reclaiming the woman I was before the lies. But standing there, looking at the circle of women who trusted me with their stories, I understood the truth. That woman no longer existed, and she didn't need to. "My husband died," I told them, "and the life I thought I had died with him." No one flinched. No one tried to soften it. "But something else grew in its place," I continued. "Not right away, not easily, and not without pain." I talked about choice, about how betrayal strips away control, but what you do next belongs to you. About how staying silent might feel safer, but it slowly erases you. After the meeting, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 35. Her hands were shaking. "My husband handles all our money," she said. "He says I stress him out when I ask questions. Nothing is technically wrong, but something feels off." That word again, off. I took her hands and looked her in the eyes. "Trust that feeling," I said. "Ask the questions anyway." "What if I'm wrong?" she asked. "Then you're uncomfortable for 5 minutes, but if you're right and you stay silent, you could lose years." She came back the next month with documents. Her husband had been secretly draining their joint account to chase crypto losses, over $80,000 gone. She filed for divorce the following week. "I'm terrified," she told me, "but I feel free." I understood exactly what she meant. Freedom isn't comfort, it's clarity. Not everyone stayed in my life through this transformation. Some friends drifted away. They preferred the quiet widow, not the woman who talked openly about betrayal and accountability. That was okay. I wasn't interested in shrinking anymore. On what would have been my wedding anniversary, I made one final decision, one that symbolized exactly who I had become. The date crept up on me quietly. What would have been my 39th wedding anniversary. For years, that day had meant dinner reservations, cards with predictable jokes, a shared understanding that surviving another year together was its own kind of victory. This time, it arrived without ceremony, just a square on the calendar I couldn't ignore. I didn't visit a cemetery. I didn't light a candle. I went to the bank. Not the one with the vault, not the one with the box that cracked my life open. A different bank, one my husband had never stepped foot in. The building smelled like fresh paint and paper, clean, neutral, untouched by memory. When the teller asked how she could help me, I said something I'd never said before. I'd like to open an account in my name only. She smiled, typing. Checking or savings? Both. She slid the forms toward me. As I filled them out, I felt something unfamiliar. Nervous, but alive. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about agency. When she asked for the name on the account, I hesitated. For nearly 4 decades, I had signed my husband's last name without thinking. It had become automatic, like breathing. I'd worn it through PTA meetings, hospital forms, library cards, and mortgage documents. I looked up. I want to use my maiden name, I said, Margaret Sullivan. The teller didn't blink. She nodded and made the change. Just like that. No permission needed, no explanation required. When I deposited my paycheck, modest, hard-earned, entirely mine, I felt a quiet satisfaction that no joint account had ever given me. Walking out of that bank, I realized something profound. I wasn't erasing my past. I was reclaiming parts of myself I had set aside for convenience, for harmony, for love that asked me not to look too closely. At the bookstore that afternoon, Ruth noticed immediately. "You look different," she said. "I did something symbolic," I replied. She grinned. "Those are usually the most powerful." That evening, my children came over for dinner. No tension, no guarded pauses, just shared food and honest conversation. We talked about the future, not in grand plans, but in possibilities. Credit slowly rebuilding, the support group expanding, life continuing. Later, alone in the quiet house, I thought about how easily trust can turn into surrender if you're not careful, how love should never require disappearing. I wasn't bitter. I was awake. And for the first time in years, I felt fully present in my own life. What I learned next wasn't about money or marriage. It was about the warning signs I wished I'd recognized before everything fell apart. Once the chaos settled, people started asking me questions, not the polite ones, the real ones. How did you not know? Were there signs? Could this have been stopped? At first, those questions felt sharp, like blame dressed up as curiosity. But over time, I realized something uncomfortable. There were signs. I just didn't recognize them as warnings. They looked like care, like competence, like love that wanted to handle things so I didn't have to. My husband insisted on managing all the finances. He framed it as kindness. "You hate this stuff," he'd say. "Why stress yourself?" And I let him, because it was easier, and because I trusted him. When I asked questions, he had answers ready, too ready, numbers delivered with confidence, explanations so smooth they shut down further discussion. I mistook fluency for honesty. The accounts were always just out of reach. Statements arrived electronically, under his email. Passwords were too complicated for me to remember. When I suggested sitting down together, he'd laugh and say, "You wouldn't enjoy it." That should have bothered me. It didn't, because nothing felt wrong until everything was. I started sharing these realizations with the support group, not as regrets, but as road signs, things to notice, things to question. Control doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in convenience. I told them if someone gets irritated when you ask about your own money, that's not efficiency, that's a red flag. If transparency feels like a favor instead of a right, something is off. The women nodded. Too many nodded. One said, "He tells me I'm bad with numbers." Another said, "He says it's better if one of us is in charge." Another whispered, "He gets angry when I ask." Patterns don't lie. That's the part no one teaches you. Abuse doesn't have to look cruel to be damaging. It can be quiet, polite, even loving on the surface. The most dangerous lies are the ones that sound reasonable. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't warning them as an outsider. I was warning them as someone who had lived inside the lie for decades and survived it. I couldn't change my past, but maybe I could interrupt someone else's future. What happened next proved that speaking up wasn't just healing, it was contagious, and the ripple effects reached far beyond that bookstore. I didn't realize how far the ripple had traveled until someone I'd never met walked into the bookstore and said my name. "You don't know me," she said, twisting the strap of her bag nervously, "but my sister comes to your group." That was new. She told me her sister had finally left a marriage where every dollar was monitored, every purchase questioned. Not violently, not dramatically, quietly, systematically. The kind of control that doesn't make headlines but hollows you out. She said you helped her understand it wasn't normal, the woman said, that she wasn't crazy. I felt something tighten in my chest. Because that word, crazy, came up again and again. It was the silencer, the way doubt was turned inward instead of outward. The group grew faster after that. Women brought friends, sisters, co-workers. Some sat silently through meetings, absorbing courage secondhand. Others spoke the moment they sat down, words spilling out like they'd been waiting for permission. One evening, a woman shared something that made the room go completely still. "My husband died last year," she said, "and I just found out everything was gone." The air shifted. She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. "I thought I was the only one." I shook my head slowly. "You're not." That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the bookstore, lights dimmed, chairs stacked. I thought about how shame thrives in isolation and how fragile it becomes when exposed to light. Speaking hadn't just helped me heal, it had dismantled silence. The support group eventually moved beyond the bookstore. We partnered with local counselors, financial advisors volunteered time, lawyers offered free consultations once a month. What started as 6 women and a pot of coffee became a network. Not loud, not dramatic, effective. I still worked the register, still shelved books, still lived modestly, but something had shifted permanently. I was no longer just surviving what happened to me. I was standing firmly inside what I'd become. One afternoon, Ruth watched me help a woman draft a list of questions to take home to her spouse. "You ever think about how different your life looks now?" she asked. I did. It wasn't the life I planned, but it was honest, grounded, mine. And then came the message that reminded me just how fragile truth can be. A woman emailed the group anonymously. "If I speak up, I lose everything. If I stay quiet, I lose myself. How do you choose?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. The answer I gave her became the final lesson of my journey and the one truth I wish every woman could hear before it's too late. I wrote back to her carefully, not like someone giving advice from a distance, but like someone who had stood exactly where she was standing. "If you stay silent," I typed, "you don't actually keep everything. You just postpone the loss and make it quieter." I told her the truth no one had told me early enough. You don't lose everything all at once. You lose it in pieces. First your voice, then your confidence, then your right to ask questions about your own life. By the time the truth surfaces, if it ever does, you've already paid the price. I didn't tell her to leave. I didn't tell her to confront. I told her to look, to gather information, to open statements, to learn what her name was attached to remember that awareness isn't betrayal, it's self-respect. A week later, she wrote back. "You were right," she said. "Something was wrong." She hadn't acted yet, but she was awake, and that mattered more than speed. Not every story ends with courtrooms or clear victories. Some end with boundaries, some with quiet exits, some with preparation that saves a future you'll never know you avoided losing. On a slow afternoon, I stood alone in the bookstore, sunlight stretching across the floor. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed love meant not asking, not doubting, not checking. She wasn't foolish, she was trusting. But trust without transparency isn't love, it's surrender. If there's one thing my story taught me, it's this. Being informed does not make you cold. Being cautious does not make you disloyal. And asking questions does not make you difficult. It makes you safe. I still miss my husband sometimes, the man I thought he was, the life I believed we were building. Grief isn't erased by truth, it just changes shape. But I don't miss the silence. I don't miss shrinking myself to preserve peace that wasn't real. And I don't miss the version of me who thought protection meant blindness. Now, when women ask how I survived, I tell them this. I stopped waiting to be saved. I stopped confusing love with control, and I chose clarity over comfort. If any part of this story feels familiar, if your instincts are whispering that something isn't right, listen. That voice is you, and you deserve to hear it. Because the most dangerous secret isn't the one someone keeps from you. It's the truth you ignore when it's trying to save you.